Linda Hirsch.
I'm Jim Carney, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education.
In 2014, the city announced the selection of 62 schools to be part of a network named PROSE Schools. These schools are free to implement innovative plans that fall outside of some of the regulations of the UFT contract. Seen as an alternative to charter schools by some, the PROSE schools offer a variety of different approaches to school reform and ways of making schools more responsive to student and teacher needs. Today, a lead researcher for the UFT and a PROSE school teacher join me to discuss the ways these schools are making a difference.
Later on in the program, I'll visit the Harvest Collegiate High School to see how the program works on the front lines. But we begin with Linda and her guests in the studio.
My guests today are Christina Collins and John McCrann. Dr. Collins is lead researcher and policy analyst for the UFT. John McCrann is a math teacher and UFT union rep at the Harvest Collegiate High School, a PROSE school in Manhattan. Welcome to EdCast, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
First, let me ask, what is PROSE? What does that acronym stand for?
It's quite a mouthful.
Yeah.
PROSE stands for Progressive Redesign Opportunity Schools for Excellence. And the program is a new part of the city teachers contract that was passed last year. And what it does is allows schools that are highly collaborative to reach out to the union and the district, a joint panel that we are on with the principals union, and suggest things that are a little different with the contract or with city regulations. And if the panel agrees with the school's ideas for how those little tweaks could help their students, then we work with them to implement them.
Let's take a step back then. What was the genesis of PROSE?
Well, we really felt like, as we said, there's teachers and schools with a lot of great ideas here in New York City that we had been seeing a lot of creativity when we went out to talk to schools through the union that really wasn't being recognized. And we wanted to give those schools that did have innovative ideas and that were places where teacher voice was heard consistently a chance to bring those ideas to the union and to the district.
Now, from the contract perspective, what is different about a PROSE school? What can a PROSE school do that a traditional school might not?
PROSE schools can apply to the panel to make changes in a number of different items. One of the most common changes that schools are interested in doing is changing the way they use time over the course of the day or over the course of the year. You see schools that switch around either student or teacher schedules in ways that are a little different than what's possible during the regular contract. You see schools changing their calendar around. Often to increase parent engagement in the school. And then you also see in many of our PROSE schools some interest in changing elements of the teacher evaluation system. As you may know, part of the teacher evaluation system is a series of observations of teachers. And one of the things we heard from the PROSE schools was that they wanted a mix of observations and teacher-selected focus areas where and John can talk more about this, where peer intervisitation could happen, and those kind of changes would be part of that element of the evaluation.
Let's take a look at the Harvest School. Tell us a little bit about the school, some background information, and what being a PROSE school means to Harvest.
So Harvest is in District 2 on 14th Street between 5th and 6th.
In Manhattan.
In Manhattan, yes. We are... This is the 4th year of our school, so we're a new small school. We were founded by a principal who was herself a teacher leader and who understands the importance of teachers leading the work that we do, that she believes that we have knowledge as classroom-based professionals that can be used to inform policy at our school.
And in what way has that played out in the school?
So teacher leaders at Harvest planned much of the school calendar, both in terms of the annual, when we do different things, and in terms of what a student's day looks like. Students are in class for longer blocks of time, which allows us to do sort of the deep inquiry work to develop students' critical thinking. So as a math teacher, I not only show them how to do the steps of some problem and practice that problem, but they're able to think about where those steps come from and why they would be doing that process to solve and to apply to real-world problems.
What else has the school done with the latitude afforded it by the label Pro School?
One of the things that I'm most excited about is to shift the way we do teacher evaluations so that so that these classroom-based experts,
And
my
that's a very
peers-
contentious part of being a teacher today, since since some people want so much to be writing on a teacher evaluation. So what does it look like at Harvest?
So at Harvest, in addition to observations by our administration, we put together a portfolio where we are showing evidence of progress towards our goals that we've met that we've been working towards both as a school, a department, and as individuals.
And this is not a standard contractual way of evaluation. This is what your school has implemented.
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah. And the way we implemented this was by consensus-based process. I wrote a proposal and led a group of teachers in refining that proposal, and then that proposal was presented to our entire membership.
Take one step back. To be a pro school, does there have to be is there a consensus process prior to the designation?
There is. This is PROSE's second year, and the process by which schools get into PROSE is that schools that are interested in joining the program come together, the principal and school leadership comes together with the teachers, and they work together in creating a proposal that's specific to their school. And then they send that application to the PROSE panel, and then we review those applications. And we're really looking for two things primarily. One is that the school shows evidence that it's a very collaborative place, that teachers and principal and school leadership work together in a very collaborative way to make decisions jointly, and that's shown both in the school in general and in the PROSE application. And then the second is the application itself should have interesting ideas in it, right, that seem well suited to the school and that are things that we think would be interesting to explore for the district in general.
And are all the teachers on board? Do they have a say in whether or not a school goes PROSE?
They do, yes. And I believe there's a
My new phrase.
provision of going PROSE.
Goes
Yeah, I like
pro-
it. It's-
Goes PROSE. I mean,
We'll start using that.
So yes, all our teachers were very excited about this opportunity. We have a staff of folks who are very interested in having their voice heard and believe that we can be the change that will impact students.
Getting back to Harvest, tell us a little bit about the curriculum and the things that you do there that you think are things that you were able to implement now that you are part of this consortium.
Yes, so another important factor of Harvest is that we are in the consortium for the New York Performance Standards Consortium. So our students graduate based on their performance on performance-based assessments. They take the English Regents, and they've actually all done quite well in the English Regents. But in addition to that, they meet graduation requirements by doing performance-based assessment. So again, this is so students are writing 15-page math papers, designing a science lab, researching a history topic, and writing 20, 25-page papers, and then defending those. In order to do that kind of work, in order to get students prepared to do that kind of work, we need long stretches of time where we can be workshopping, where a student's paper can be up on the overhead on the digital projector, and teachers and students can look at that together. We wouldn't be able to do that in a 47-minute period.
I have almost a kind of, a question, just based on what you're saying now. The longer stretch of time, you are allowed to play around with the class schedule because you are this pro school. Do you feel as a teacher, or do your teachers feel that the longer stretch of time would be better for all schools? I mean, should that be something that we should be considering as a way of improving instruction in schools? I know some of the charter schools, as you know, certainly play around with the school day. Is that something that you think we really should be thinking about?
My perspective is that the people who know best how to get the students to do what they need them to do are the professionals who are working with them every day.
The teachers.
Exactly. So that's sort of my general philosophy about this is teachers are very bright and very professional folks, and I feel like they can make those decisions when given the opportunity in a way that will best serve their
maybe that
students.
each school should ultimately have to make that decision for themselves about what works best for their individual school.
Something that's interesting about us now that we're pros is, sort of the refrain often in teachers' lounges or in the teacher workroom, or, why are they making us do this? And I think an interesting language shift for us now that we're pros is, well, why did we decide?
Why did we decide?
Why did we decide to do this?
That's
and
a
we're
much
the ones,
better feeling, no
it
matter
feels-
what,
yeah.
no matter the outcome.
I
You
agree.
decided. Jim Carney had the opportunity to visit Harvest, so let's take a look and see what he saw there.
Tucked away on the fourth floor of an office building on 14th Street, Harvest Collegiate High School serves over 300 students in Lower Manhattan. Michael Dunson is the assistant principal.
Since working here, the relationship between teacher and administrator has been fantastic. I feel it's collaborative. I feel that we work together to make decisions, to implement decisions, that there's a lot of flexibility permitted within the PROSE structure that enables us to change structures for the students that will benefit the students' education.
It's an incredible, incredible teaching environment. I helped start the school, and I forget and take for granted how wonderful it is. This room we're in right now, we call it Harvest Central. And you have schools where the staff room is not a place you want to go if you want to stay happy, let alone a place you want to go to talk about students and how they're doing. Whereas I totally take for granted that in this room at all points of time, it's collegial people who are professional and working together to help improve students' learning.
I think the way we collaborate this year with for example, our scheduling, and between the union and administrators coming together and figuring out a schedule that would work best for our students. So that was something we were able to come together. A teacher proposed it. Together with the teachers, it was revised. The program was revised. And together between teachers and administrators, we came to a final decision and said this is the program that we would like to have for the next year. So from each step along in the process, teachers were involved in determining what the schedule is going to be, how the schedule should be implemented, and that was a really good example of the collaborative effort. The coursework almost feels like a college elective system. So the way in which the courses are designed, and in terms of a very specific focus.
So what's going to happen is I'm going to give you each one of the 9 properties that we've just studied. On that poster, you are going to name your property, give a definition of your property, give an example with numbers, an example with variables.
We've been able to build a staff of experienced, brilliant, talented teachers who are then given the trust and support to kind of do their thing in incredible ways. I've worked at other schools with very hardworking young teachers, and I've worked at other schools where teachers weren't trusted.
So how can you say that in your words so that everybody else can understand?
One of our teachers is teaching crime and punishment and using the Showtime show Dexter as a way to discuss the book.
One of my favorite classes in the school is happening right now. It's a class called Versus Verses, which, if you ask a student what it's about, it's a class about poetry. And they're doing different poems every day, and they're writing poems. But what it's really about is students who are really struggling with language, be it reading or writing. And I don't want to say they're being tricked into learning how to write kind of advanced analytical essays through poetry, but they're being tricked into learning how to write advanced analytical essays through poetry. I have never been more proud to be a member of the UFT than at the meeting I was in with chapter leaders from our network of schools, where Michael Mulgrew came to us and told us about how we were going to use PROSE to further support a lot of things our schools were already doing, but more significantly to elevate what we were doing. I felt both at this school and in previous schools, we were kind of hiding a lot of what we were doing, some of it from the city and some of it from the union. And to be able to get out and really openly talk about what we're doing in the school and how we're doing things differently, and to know we have the full support of the union and for the most part the support of the city in doing so, has been incredibly empowering and just makes me feel better coming to work every single day.
When you get up in the morning, why do you come to work?
The kids. Yeah, working with the kids and getting an opportunity to see the school continue to grow and to see my students graduate. Absolutely.
From the Harvest School in Lower Manhattan, I'm Jim Carney. Now back to Linda and her guests in the studio.
Do you enjoy being at Harvest every day? What's it like to be there?
It's a wonderful place. The students are fantastic. We have a very supportive group of parents. Our sort of motto is every student is an intellectual, and that's something that it's an exciting place to be.
Now, how many PROSE schools are there now, and where are they, and what grade levels are they?
There are about 126 PROSE schools now, citywide. We had 64 schools apply in the first year, and we've added about another 60 in this past year. And they're all over the city. We have schools in every borough. We added our first 2 in Staten Island this year. And they're a mix of elementary, middle schools, and high schools. We do have a few more high schools than other types of schools, in part because many of the schools in the consortium that John mentioned, as well as some of the other organizations in the city are high schools. But we really tried to get a mix of different levels of schools because, again, we feel as if people in different kinds of school know best for them, and we didn't want PROSE to be just about one kind of school.
So PROSE really is not, let me go back over that, just one kind of school. Within each school there are variations for what each school has deemed important to them. Can you tell us a little bit about some other things that are happening in some other PROSE schools that are not high school?
Sure. I mean, one very exciting thing that we've worked on over the past year is a school that wanted to try a 4-day work week for its teachers. So the students are there for 5 days and teachers work 4 longer days. And they've been working for a long time to put together a teacher and student calendar that would let them do that.
What happens on the 5th day?
On the 5th day, the students are there with the teachers that are there for the 5th day. So teachers have sort of a staggered schedule where some may have off on Tuesday and some may have off Friday, but the students are there every day. And because the teachers are there working the longer day on the other days, that extended learning time lets them integrate different things into their schedule without necessarily adding to the cost or adding to the teachers' time that they're required to actually be in the school building.
I mean, John, you obviously discussed some of the changes that you were able to make at the school. There has been some criticism that schools who are part of PROSE have not all been able to implement the changes that they wanted to implement. That they did send in an application, but only parts of it got approved, or certain components have not yet been put into practice. Will they be, or what's the process like for enacting change?
It's been a little bit of a very quick process, and I think that's one of the challenges we've faced. PROSE really went from a good idea to being in the contract within the space of just a couple months when it was created.
For the city, anything that just takes a couple of months is simply staggering.
Exactly. And we were really incredibly pleased, but at the same time somewhat overwhelmed by the fact that, as I mentioned, over 60 schools successfully applied, and to get into PROSE, they actually had to have over 65% of their UFT members vote to join it, and we had schools, for the most part, and still do, that had 90 to 100% of their members join. So we were really pleased with that level of interest that first year, but it was a very quick, few-week process to do that. And so what we were able to do in the first year, as I mentioned, was actually work with the city and with the state to get flexibility on teacher evaluation. We are able to do some of the scheduling work, and we're really working closely with the schools this year, both schools that came in that first year and then schools that have come in since then, to say, okay, what do you want to do next? What's your highest priority? But again, with 126 schools already in just a little over 15 months, it's been great. It's been wonderful to have all that interest, and we're hoping to get the schools more of what they're interested in.
Is there anything you would not approve? Is there any proposal that a school could come up with that would be so outside of the boundaries that it could not even be considered?
I think, one of the things we've discussed and have thought about is our schools' teachers want to be treated as professionals throughout the city, and we would be really concerned if a school came to us and said, we've all decided that we're willing to work longer hours for less money, for example, right? Like you may have a school where everyone in that school feels like that's the best thing for them, but in an education system as a whole, where teachers are already
That would undermine the contract
right,
in a certain
it would undermine the
on
contract, but we really feel like that would be something that in the long run would not be best for students and for teachers and for the profession. And so that's an example of something where we've explicitly said, you can bring us variations where your schedule changes and things like that, like I said, the 4-day week. But something like that where we've reflected on it and say, this would not be something that we would want to set a precedent for citywide.
Right. Have you played with class size at your school?
We have not.
I played with. I mean, experimented with.
No, we have not. That's not something. That's not a revision. Again, the
I
kinds
know
of
that
learning
some
that we
pro
do.
schools have said some larger schools and smaller. And is there any changes that you've made in terms of you did mention some changes in the teacher schedules? Anything about ratio from teacher to student or any other kinds of changes like that? Or professional development? Is that more?
Professional development, we've done some things with. We have a teacher leader who plans our professional development. His title is Professional Learning Organizer, and so community organizer. And he's doing, so he plans all of our principal approves it, but he plans.
So they come from within your own institution.
Exactly.
You're planning the PD that you need for your school.
Exactly.
I have to ask the question that I know you hear all the time. Unions are taking a lot of blame for being impediments to improving education, that they are getting in the way, that their contract means that good things can't happen. What's your answer to that?
Well, I think PROSE is a good answer to that, right? I feel as if unions do get that criticism pretty regularly. And as I mentioned, we're looking at schools where people are working under the union contract very effectively, and they have some ideas for ways that if the union contract was tweaked a little bit, like I said, or city regulations or state regulations, because teacher evaluation is a state regulation, that could be improved. And PROSE is actually part of the union contract as well. And it came from us, from our conversations with teachers like John and other teachers that we've met over the years. And so I do feel like teachers' unions are being effective in representing the voices of their members. And a lot of times when reformers say union contracts are an impediment, it's not necessarily their impediment to what educators in the classroom think needs to happen to make schools better.
Well, certainly one of the things that education reformers are saying they want is the ability to fire teachers. And this whole thing about firing bad teachers as the panacea to everything that's wrong with education is a subject we've discussed many times on EdCast. But you wrote a very interesting article about why we can't fire our way to urban school reform. Can you just tell us very briefly what is so misguided from your perspective about this notion of the firing of everybody?
And that was pre-PROSE, but it definitely shaped my opinion on this. I mean, I think there are two reasons. One, most fundamentally, is that teacher turnover is something that's been shown to actually hurt students and actually hurt our neediest students the most. There was a study several years ago that I cited in that blog post that actually found where even when teachers were replaced with teachers with higher value added, the numerical formula, that still hurt the achievement of their students. And so I think there's that evidence there, as well as the parent dismay over high teacher turnover in their schools. And I also feel like when it comes to issues like today's struggling schools, and I don't know if you saw Michael Mulgrew's op-ed recently about this, we have schools that are being told that they need to replace half of their staffs because they're struggling. And what we found is actually many of those schools have already had more than half of their staff turnover in the last few years anyway. And we really feel as if this emphasis on getting rid of teachers, especially getting rid of teachers based primarily on test scores, is a very problematic way to think about helping our struggling schools.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all the news about PROSE. It sounds like a very exciting approach, so thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don't go away. We'll be right back with our EdBytes. Welcome back to this edition of EdBytes.
A prison debate team recently beat Harvard University champions in a national competition. The inmates were part of the Barred Prison Initiative program, which allows incarcerated men and women to earn degrees from Bard College. The latest debate was about whether public schools should have the ability to deny enrollment to undocumented students. The inmates argued against their own beliefs, stating that if students were denied admission, nonprofits and wealthier schools would step in. The losing Harvard team described their opponents as phenomenally intelligent and articulate. The victory made headlines.
If you've ever caught yourself watching Sesame Street long after your kids have stopped, you may have a new reason to tune in. Sesame Workshop is offering a free online course on early math education called Make Believe Math. It uses characters from the show, but is actually intended for adults who suffer from their own math anxiety. Described as a fun approach to math, it is offered through Google Hangouts and uses video, slides, and discussion boards. The course takes 3 hours to complete and will be available until the end of October.
The Atlantic Online reports on a new study that points to high levels of stress experienced by students at both ends of the spectrum, those in elite high schools and those in low-income schools. A majority of the students at 2 elite high schools reported feeling chronic stress, with 38% saying that they had used alcohol in the past month. The stress is related to intense academic pressure and the competition to get into top colleges. Research conducted in the South Bronx identifies another group of students under great stress, those at the lowest ends of the socioeconomic ladder. These students fear for their physical safety in schools, citing stabbings, gang activity, and fights.
A recent CNN report examined why teens are hooked on social media. Based on a study of over 200 eighth graders across the country, a major reason is their anxiety over their own popularity and the need to defend themselves against challengers. Teens check in frequently to see if their posts are getting likes and comments, if their friends are excluding them, and if anyone is saying mean things about them. Most parents underestimated the fighting occurring on social media. The researchers observed that there are positive aspects to social media as well. Anybody talking about us?
Oh, not yet, but actually you can. Send us an email or write to our Facebook page.
That's it for this edition of EdCast.
Until next time, class dismissed.
Let's just check.